Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. So today we are going to continue our journey to Endgame with part 19. We are on the home stretch now um, with 2018's Ant-Man and the Wasp, which is a direct sequel to 2015's Ant-Man, as well as a partial sequel, at least for the Scott Lang character, from 2016's Captain America Civil War. So again, we have our returning cast. We have Paul Rudd as Scott Lang, Evangeline Lilly as Janet Van Dyne, or not Janet, Hope Van Dyne. Michael Douglas coming in again as an older Hank Pym. And also introducing Michelle Pfeiffer coming in as Janet Van Dyne, Hope's mother. So they do a little bit of a recap at the beginning where they show the instant that Janet shrinks herself down to microscopic level to stop the nuclear device in 1987. Um, again, this is kind of a thing that just happens with Marvel movies. But then we very quickly go back to present day, and we kind of get this little scene where Paul Rudd is with his daughter Cassie, or Scott Lang is with his daughter Cassie, and they're playing with this. It's kind of like a cardboard little tunnel thing that he's built at his house, um, and basically it's just kind of a thing to entertain his daughter. We see that their relationship has kind of gotten better since the first Ant-Man. His daughter talks a lot more. She's not really an annoying kid, which is kind of a running problem with a lot of movies when they have small kids in them, as they tend to be very annoying. She does not come off that way, which is a credit to the actress. And also a credit to Paul Rudd, because they have a very good relationship in this. And again, this movie is very much about kind of like the first one. It's in a way it's about parents and their children. It's about fathers and daughters, or mothers and daughters, and things like that. Because really they're all one big family almost, and it kind of works itself out like that. So after this, there's an incident where Paul Rudd's foot goes through a fence, and we find out that he actually has an ankle bracelet on. And this is where the Captain America Civil War stuff comes in, because he has broken the perimeter of his home, and he is under house arrest. So basically, he's been under house arrest for the past 2 years. Because of the incident in Germany, which is the Sokovia, which is a violation of the Sokovia Accords. So basically, we find out that Scott's out from being thrown back in prison was that he would go under 2 years of house arrest, and he would not be allowed to use his powers, or his suit would be confiscated essentially. Even though we find out that he actually got rid of it. So Scott then proceeds to kind of. There's a few little like running gags. There's a card trick gag and stuff like that. Again, Ant Man is kind of supposed to be funny. That's why Paul Rudd is playing the character, because he's a comedic actor. And it works. He's still just as charming as he was in the first Ant Man. I enjoy his acting. I enjoy the acting of actually pretty much almost the entire cast, with one exception, and I'll get to that exception later. But for the most part, they set this situation up very well, and we also learn that Scott Lang essentially only has a few more days left of his house arrest before he has the ankle bracelet taken off, and he is essentially a free man. Um, so this is where we get into kind of the weird portion of the plot that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Uh, so they establish that basically Evangeline Lilly and Michael Douglas, or Hank Pym and Hope Pym, are on the run, and because they were implicated with the Sokovia Accords and they refused to comply. So instead, they've been on the run and trying to complete their quantum experiments in order to visit the quantum realm, which is actually it's hinted at, or not hinted at, but it's teased at the end of the first Ant-Man, where Hank Pym thinks that maybe there's a way to save Janet and that she might still be alive. But because Scott Lang went to Germany, that basically implicated them. So now they're both pissed at him, and neither one of them has talked to them. They haven't talked to each other in over 2 years. So what winds up happening here is that Scott Lang has this very strange dream where we're first person, and we are looking through the eyes of Janet Van Dyne as she's running around the house playing with her daughter Hope. And this is when Hope was very young and Janet was young. This was back in the 80s, before, obviously, before she went into the quantum realm. Uh, but it seems almost like a vision. So Paul Rudd doesn't really know how to deal with this. He doesn't know what's going on, but he feels like he needs to call Michael Douglas, and he has basically a cell phone that he kept for emergencies in his wall, that he proceeds to use, and he leaves a message for Michael Douglas. Now, what happens here is that Paul Rudd is basically like kicking himself at this point because now he is essentially compromised his. He's compromised his possible uh, release from his house arrest because he has now gone and contacted them. So now he's not even he's basically, this is kind of what gets the plot rolling, where now he's implicated himself, but he has to kind of get out of this. Um, but the problem I have is the vision is kind of strange. It's never really explained how he's able to get the visions. And there's an even weirder moment later in the film that again doesn't make all that much sense. It's really one of my big gripes with the plot line of this film is it feels like it's just a MacGuffin in order to kind of get the plot rolling. But this then leads to Hope and Scott and Hank Pym kidnapping Scott Lang from his home and leaving a decoy. And this is actually kind of funny because the decoy is actually a blown up ant that is wearing his leg collar, his ankle bracelet, so that they can't tell that he has left his house. Um, so they kidnap him and they basically have to try and get this information out of him, and through some basically just some light questioning and stuff like that and some explanations, they're able to get the information from him that he in reality had some kind of a vision that was influenced by Janet Van Dyne somehow, and again they don't really explain how that happens. And the other thing is they give her like mystical Jesus powers, but I'll get to that later. It's kind of strange, but basically they bring him in and they find out that basically they have this factory that they're using, or this lab that they've created, and the lab itself can actually be shrunk down and turned into a suitcase, which is kind of funny. Again, they up the ante with the shrinking and the growing of things. They have this whole like Hot Wheels thing that has these what look like little Hot Wheels cars in them, but they're actually real cars that have been shrunk down, and they make them bigger and stuff like that. They do it with the suits as well. So it's actually kind of interesting, all the stuff that they kind of cram into this movie, that makes it a bit different than the first one and kind of ups what's happening with the first one. So now that Hank and Hope real know kind of what's going on, and they know that Janet is alive and somehow made contact with Scott, they want to finish their quantum portal, which is what they're going to use to go into the quantum realm and get her out. But what happens is that they need a black market part because again they're on the run pretty much constantly, because of their they do, because they did not comply with the Sokovia Accords. So they need to get all their parts essentially from black market dealers. Their scientific parts. They can't just buy them legitimately. They also probably don't have any money. So Evangeline Lilly is going to try and get one of these parts, and she basically gets stiffed because the guy realizes what he can. He wants too much. They don't have enough. And so on and so forth. So she just decides to take it. So this is the first time we actually get to see her in the Wasp costume. We saw it at the very end of Ant-Man, of the original Ant-Man, where Hank Pym shows her the updated costume, which was designed based off of Janet's costume from the 80s. But this is the first time we actually get to see her in it, and she has a lot of really good action scenes in this movie. I mean, obviously she outdoes Paul Rudd in a sense because she's more acrobatic and she can fly, and the shrinking and the growing and all that stuff. She's a bit quicker with what she's doing, even though Scott, the big advantage for Scott Lang is that he can grow very large. He can become Giant Man now, as opposed to Evangeline Lilly, who basically stays the same size. Um, but the thing is that this eventually goes south because we now have the introduction of our villain character, and our villain character is Ghost. Now, this version of Ghost is a bit different from the comic books, in the sense that her name is Ava, and basically we find out later on through a few flashbacks that her parents were former business partners of Hank Pym. There was an accident that basically caused her body to phase in and out of what we consider to be reality. So she wears a suit that basically contains it and helps her control it. But there are issues and stuff like that. So she actually wants the quantum stuff for an entirely different reason that we find out later. Um, but uh, Scott Lang is able to get the extra suit from Hank Pym, and he is able to come in, and the two of them are able to fight her off to a point, but she is able to escape with the part that they were going to procure. So now, again, they're back kind of at square one. Um, but at the same time, Scott is basically kind of thinking that to he has to get back to his house, because if he doesn't, and the cops show up, then he's screwed and he'll go to jail. But the real thing that Ghost winds up escaping with is the lab suitcase that they had, because basically they're riding around in a van and they're just kind of putting it up in vacant lots, and that's what they show them doing. Um, but she shows like this kind of interesting thing. Now I'm not sure how it would actually work, but it is kind of interesting where she phases her hand through Hank Pym's neck and basically says that she can materialize it and like materialize a hole in him. Now that's very interesting, considering that she phases through people quite a bit in this film. So if that was the case, why wouldn't she just do it with uh, Ant Man and Wasp? Like, if you can just insta kill people like that, why wouldn't you just do it? And they never really explain why she doesn't just do that, just brutally murder them for no reason. Well, not for no reason, but just brutally murder them and get them out of the way. Because it seems easy, because she goes through people frequently. It's not like, she goes through walls and stuff like that too. But again, maybe it's because it would harm her in some way. I don't know. But she does it with Michael Douglas and basically threatens to kill him. But she give her the lab and she escapes with it. So now they have a problem. They have the part, but they don't have the lab, which has all the other equipment in it. So essentially now they need to find Ghost. Um, so in order to do that, they unfortunately uh, now they need to uh, go and see one of Hank Pym's former business partners, Bill Foster. Now, Bill Foster is actually was the superhero Goliath. Who basically was kind of the first giant man, quote unquote. He only had the power to grow larger, and in this movie he is played by Lawrence Fishburne. So they go to this college that he works at, and they go and meet with him. But it's actually kind of funny because they have it in the trailer for it as well. There's this kind of funny dialogue between him and Paul Rudd, where they both say, "Oh, how big did you get? Oh, how big did you get?" And then it's basically it's a dick measuring contest, which I mean, it's kind of funny, but because they're both sort of into it, and Paul Rudd and Lawrence Fishburne are kind of funny when they're doing it, it works. Again, the humor for the most part works in this movie, even though there's a bit less of it. I just don't think it didn't have. Edgar Wright was a major part of the first Ant-Man, and you can tell because the humor was spot on throughout the entire film. And this one, the humor's on, but it's not always on all the time. It's sporadic, and it doesn't really work as well as it did in the first uh, first Ant-Man film, where the humor, the whole stuff, a lot of the stuff they do bring some of that stuff back, like the whole thing with Louise, where he has his whole quick talking thing. Um, but now the other problem is they also have these other guys on their tail who they stole the park from. So you have three factions essentially running around, or actually technically four. You have Pym and Lang and Hope, who are all trying to get the lab and the part together so that they can go into the quantum realm. You have these black market tech dealers that now want them because they stole something from them. You have the FBI who is looking at Scott Lang, who is still under house arrest, and then you also have the mystery ghost woman who stole the lab. So you have all of these kind of moving cogs in the middle part of this movie, and it does work kind of. It's not outrageously good, but it again it does work. So basically, Bill Foster, they go and they meet him, and but uh, he basically reveals that he is not going to help them, and he has an less than stellar relationship with Hank Pym. Let's just say that he brings up the fact that Janet was the only one that he didn't drive away, and she died for it, and a bunch of other stuff. Which if I remember, at the beginning of the first Ant Man, the guy that said that wound up getting his face punched in. But in the end, Foster does eventually help them to locate the lab, and they basically find it in this it's sort of in this where Ghost has her little facility essentially. Um, because she has this place, and again, where it's not really explained until a little bit later what it is, but it's this almost like a greenhouse. It's this place that's way the hell out in the woods, and she essentially goes into this chamber there that has these vibrating, almost like shield-like walls. And they basically explain that it's kind of like a stabilization chamber that she has to spend her time in when she's not in her suit. Um, but they go there and they wind up finding the lab, but in reality it's a double cross because Bill Foster is actually working with her because he was friends with her father, and they both blame Pym for what happened to them because they were trying to replicate the Pym particles and they screwed up. So the uh, now we have a situation where they're going to use the quantum portal. They want to harvest the quantum energy from Janet. And again, how they know that she's alive is weird, but they want to harvest her quantum energy in order to heal Ava. Um, but Hank is convinced that this is going to kill Janet, so he does it. So he's trying to get them to not do it. They manage to escape after Hank fakes a heart attack and releases a bunch of ants that, for some reason, grow in size. Again, this scene is kind of strange. Where Scott Lang and Hope Van Dyne and uh, Hank Pym are all tied to chairs in this greenhouse area, or this house where she lives, and they're basically being interrogated, and they're saying what they're going to do because now they have the part and they also have the lab, so they're going to fix it up and they're going to go do it. But like I said, Hank Pym fakes a heart attack, and they take this. They set it up earlier that Hank has this tin of Altoids, and Hope basically says that his heart medication is in there. He needs it or he will die. So Bill Foster, goes for it, and Ava tells him to stop. But when he opens it, all these ants pop out, and then they grow to an enormous size and surround Ghost and Bill Foster. How they grow in size, I don't know because it never shows any kind of device hitting them or anything like that. He just opens it. It's like one of those cans of those springs and stuff that come out. You open the can and all these fuzzy springs like come out of the top of the can and like hit you in the face. It was almost like that, but it was very strange. They never explain like why they just magically grow when they come out of the Altoid can, unless Hank had it rigged somehow. I don't know. It was a little weird, but moving past that, basically now we're kind of moving into it. We're pretty much in the third act almost, um, where we kind of learn about Ava's past. We get to see the accident where her parents died, and we get to see kind of what happened to her, where she was basically almost like a Winter Soldier type of deal, where she got recruited by Shield slash Hydra, and she's essentially been just killing people for the last about 10 years. And she's essentially an assassin, but then when Hydra fell in Captain America the Winter Soldier, she went rogue. And the only thing that was able to happen was she managed to find Bill Foster, who was an old friend of her father's, and together they conspired to uh, have their revenge on Hank Pym. Uh, Now, there's another kind of weird part of this. So after they steal the facility, they blow it back up and they go inside and they start trying to install the part. But when they do something, for some reason, Janet Pym is able to talk through Scott Lang, and they never explain how this is supposed to happen. It's just kind of a quantum realm magic where she's speaking through Scott Lang. So there's this really weird conversation where Scott Lang, as Janet Pym, is talking to Hank Pym and Hope Van Dyne, and then he suddenly is just out of it. Another, a little while later, after she explains where they need to go in order to meet her. Otherwise, there's some kind of causality thing where they won't be able to meet again for like a century. So there's just one chance to save her, basically. Um, Now, at the same time, Scott has been communicating back and forth with Louise because they're in a security business, and again, it's very, very weird and complicated. But basically, he tells them where he is. Because he needs Louise to come there so he can finalize documents, otherwise they lose their business. Again, it's kind of a side point, but they make it. It's one of those weird things. It's a side thing in the film where he's talking to Louise back and forth about the security stuff with him and the other two guys. But they make it a main part of the film at the end because they drag in the guys, the black market tech guys, who find out that Scott works with Louise. They break into his office, and then after Scott has told them where he is, they use a quote unquote truth serum, which is actually kind of an amusing scene back and forth where they call it something else, but Louise calls it a truth serum, and it's kind of strange. But basically, it makes them tell the truth, so they find out where they are, and those guys then go there to try and get their tech back. Now we have kind of the final part of the film where we go into Hank goes into the quantum realm in order to rescue Janet, but at the same time, they Hope and Scott have to try and keep the lab away from Ghost and away from the tech dealers, so that they don't all bunch up and destroy the portal before Michael Douglas comes back with Janet. And we cut back and forth in this from, basically it's kind of like catch the, almost like a rat race. They're all after the lab. They all have to get the lab. Uh, so and also at the same time, the FBI are trying to find Scott Lang because they believe that he has somehow cheated the system. So the FBI agent that's been looking after him is now trying to find out where whether or not he's still in his home. So now we have a situation where we have all four parties. Again, the end of this movie is almost like a clusterfuck, where we have all of these parties just chasing and running after each other to try and find this lab. And if I feel like I'm rambling on in this, it's because I am, because there's so many cogs and so many things that are going on in this third act, where there's a point where the suit malfunctions, and Scott is stuck in like a semi-giant form, and then a bunch of other stuff. Like the suit malfunctions are actually a common thing throughout the film, where actually there's a point where Scott has to go find the other Ant-Man suit that he had before because he needs the limiter from it because his limiter is screwed up, and he actually shrinks down to the size of like a small kid, and he can't change his size. And basically, Hope just like berates him the entire time, and he has to go to his daughter's school in order to get it because he taped it to the bottom of a little trophy that he had. Um, that she had given him. Uh, but again, the scenes are relatively amusing. They're funny, uh, and like I said, the humor, even though it's spread sporadically, it does work. So at the end of the movie, Louise and all of them, they take out the tech guys because they managed to escape after the interrogation. Uh, Hank, and yeah, Scott and Hope managed to fight off Ghost long enough to save Janet, who has reunited with Hank in the quantum realm, and they manage to escape in their ship and come back. But Janet, for some reason, again, they never explain this, but apparently she has some kind of magic quantum realm Jesus powers, where she's able to partially heal Ava with some of her quantum energy, but they just need to harvest more energy from the quantum realm in order to heal her further and improve her condition so that she doesn't, destabilize. Because essentially that's her entire goal, is to not destabilize. Because if she destabilizes, then her body will totally shift over into another dimension, and she'll just basically kind of, her molecules will explode. Um, so now we have the situation where Janet is back and kind of the family is back together. Scott manages to get back in time to get his leg bracelet released, so he is now a free man. But at the same time, they have he is reunited with Hope and obviously the whole Pym family, and they're working together again. So we're kind of back to the status quo at the end of the movie, but now we have Michelle Pfeiffer's Janet Van Dyne added into the mix. Then the last shot of the movie is kind of funny. You have they're supposed to be, it's Hope and Scott and Scott's daughter Cassie at what looks like a drive-in, and they're all sitting in the car and they're watching a movie, and you find out actually it's just a little tiny thing in the backyard, and they've actually shrunk the car and themselves down to the side, to like the size of a matchbox, and they're just watching it in the grass, and there's like an ant that crawls by them and stuff. Again, it's kind of funny, and it's a little moment for kind of the quote unquote new family. That Scott's kind of starting with Hope. So that's kind of the idea of this, is that they've rekindled their relationship, and his relationship with his daughter has never been better. So we're moving forward with this almost kind of family dynamic, this kind of thing that Michelle Pfeiffer and Michael Douglas had with Hope originally. Except now it's Scott and Hope and Cassie. So it's a kind of a heartwarming ending. I like it. The post-credit scene is ominous, because basically everybody gets dusted except for Scott Lang because of Thanos snapping his fingers. Which is, again, this movie was made after, this movie was put out after Avengers: Infinity War came out. So they needed some kind of a tie-in to kind of show when this was taking place and where Scott Lang was during the events of Infinity War, which basically means he was stuck in the quantum realm. Um, so just to go back to one other thing in the film, because we have this new family dynamic, I was actually happy with this choice that they got rid of the old family, the ex-wife and the new husband. They pop up a couple of times, but they're mostly just joke characters. They show up on occasion, and then they're immediately out of the movie, and that's fine with me. They were one of the most annoying parts of the first Ant-Man. I hated that. So I'm glad that they're kind of just relegated to their own little corner, and they're kind of gone. Um, Now, if I'm going to go into kind of the specifics, again, like I said before, the humor works even though it's more sparse. I like the acting. The acting is done very well. Especially the stuff between Paul Rudd, Evangeline Lilly, Michael Douglas, and Michelle Pfeiffer. All of them play their roles really well. The only one that I give some crap to is Ghost, the actress that played her. Uh, she is very rigid. Her character is very two dimensional. And again, we have the Marvel villain problem, which seems to pop up less now, but it still pops up from occasion, where she's a very two dimensional villain. We find out a little bit about her past, and it fleshes her out a little bit. But again, she doesn't really have that much character. She doesn't talk all that much. She's only in a few scenes. She just seems to be obsessed with killing people. She loves killing people. Um, but aside from that, that's really the main drawback in this, is that the main villain is not very good. And also, Ghost in the comic books, I believe, was a thief, if I remember correctly, not an assassin. But again, it's the movies. I shouldn't really be comparing it to the comic books all that much. It shouldn't be a religious interpretation. But in the end, I think that really the movie is elevated by everyone else as opposed to her. The movie is only brought down by her as a character. Overall, I did enjoy the film, but it does have some pretty significant problems. Now, if I was to give this film a rating, I would have to give it. I would have to give it 7 ant drum solos out of 10. So with that, we move through the second Ant-Man film, and we will move on next time to 2017's Thor Ragnarok, the third film in the Thor solo series, with returning stars Chris Hemsworth, Tom Hiddleston, uh, Anthony Hopkins, and introducing Kate Blanchett as Hela. So we will see that next time. Um, but until then, remember, if you have any thoughts, leave them in the comments. Uh, Hit the like button, hit the bell for notifications, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?